Welcome everybody. My name is Danette. I am the Waste Minimisation Support Officer for Huntingdonshire District Council. I work in the Waste Minimisation team. We're a team of 3, so there's my manager and there's also an administrator as well. So I've got a short presentation I'll go through, and then at the end of that, or during that, because we're quite a small group today, if you've got any questions, just feel free to chuck those in. Okay, so we work alongside the waste team. So there's 3 managers that sort of keep everything running, and that is to service 77,000 domestic properties across Huntingdonshire for their waste collections. And that is just under 6 million waste collections every year, and that's across the 3 different collections, which is completed amazingly by just 75 employees with 23 waste collection vehicles and travelling nearly 250,000 miles. So, just over 250,000 miles. So it's a tough feat that we actually get done quite well. So bear with us if there are any issues. So of those 6 million waste collections made every year, we do have a really good successful rate of collection rather than missed bins. We do have missed bins from time to time, and I'm sure you'll understand why. And that rate is really low. This is obviously an old stat, but it's around about that same figure. I think we did a little bit better the last year than that figure, but it's usually around about that. So of the waste that is collected, it's about 60% of that is recycled or composted. So that's counted as we count that as to be recycled. So it's composted comes under the recycling as well. And as you can see there, sort of the different tonnages, we do collect sort of somewhere in the region of about 80,000 tonnes a year, which is quite a lot really, when you think about it. The material that is collected within the blue bin, the majority of that, the vast majority of that, and ever increasing majority of that is effectively recycled. So there is a small percentage that is contaminated. It's too contaminated to be able to get that recycled. And as you can see on the screen, if you squint quite a bit, you'll see that the materials that we can't recycle that do end up in that stream. The biggest one of which has always been food, which takes up usually around about half of the contaminated waste. It's usually about 50% of that or more is food. The percentages has come down time and time again. So the latest figures are under 5%, so we've managed to get that down even further than the 6.73 that we achieved for our last tax year. So it's ever sort of a work in progress, and we're constantly trying to get it even lower and lower. To get that rate, we have increased communications with the residents, but we also work really closely with our crews, do staff training on rejections, and then also work quite closely with our partners at Amy to look at sort of what is coming through and kind of trying to figure out different ways that we can then tackle that. A common question that we do get, as I'm sure you're aware, when things come into the news is, where does my recycling go and is it actually recycled? The majority of it is recycled within the UK, so there is a small percentage of cardboard that's collected, and that is sent overseas. It can go to each different stream will go on to different companies in different places. So the cardboard, I believe, goes on to about 10 different organisations, 3 of which are abroad, and I think one of them is the Netherlands or Denmark. I can't remember which now, but it's only a small percentage of our cardboard that actually goes outside of the UK. With plastics, some of it actually stays within the county. and although it goes out of county to be processed, it comes back, sorry, out of the district to be processed, it comes back into the district as well. So there's plastic-free processors based in Huntingdonshire that some of our recycling sort of goes off to Waterbeach, gets separated out into just plastic, and then comes back into Huntingdonshire to be made into new plastic. But like I say, the vast majority of that does all remain in the UK. A bit further on than I thought there. So what does the recycling become? So obviously metal cans and drinks cans and things like that become new drinks cans and food cans, but it can also be turned into other things. So it can be turned into things like cars and machinery and all kinds of different things. Glass can become new glass bottles and etc. Plastic usually gets downgraded, but some is getting made back into the same kinds of products that it was before. And on there we've also got paper and cartons, etc. So all those get separated out and turned back into new products as well. There's a short video. Sometimes it works well, sometimes not so well, but I'll circulate the link so people can watch it again if they wish, if the sound isn't brilliant on it.
This is the material recovery facility. We take the contents of your recycling bins and sort them so that they can be sent for recycling into new products. Recycling bin waste comes in and is unloaded into the tipping hall. The waste then proceeds along conveyor belts for processing. Sometimes by hand, sometimes mechanically. The first job is to remove items that should not have been in the recycling bins, as these can cause damage to the machinery. Nappies should go in general rubbish. Clothes and other textiles should go to charity shops or textile banks, while large plastic sheets and heavy metal items should go to household recycling centres. Recycling covered in food messes up the rest of the load and could reduce the value. Remember to wash and squash food and drinks containers before putting them in the bin. The waste is now ready to be sorted into different types. This machine separates the glass. This one removes all the corrugated cardboard items. Then optical sorters separate the plastic from the paper. The next stage removes newspapers, magazines and pamphlets. Any incorrect items which made it through the sorting are then removed. Only plastic, metal and some mixed paper is now left to sort. A ballistic separator splits it into light and heavy materials. The heavy material is mainly metals and drinks cartons. A magnetic separator pulls out the ferrous metals such as food cans. And then an eddy current separator removes the non-ferrous metals such as aluminium cans, aerosols and cartons. The cartons are then separated by hand. All remaining material goes through a hand-picking cabin where it's separated for recycling. Meanwhile, the light fraction, which is mainly composed of plastic, goes through a series of clever separators which use infrared light to tell different plastics apart. Then targeted air jets blow each of them into different conveyors. The MRF can separate out milk containers, clear plastic bottles, coloured plastic bottles, pots, tubs, trays and plastic film. Once again, the waste is hand-sorted to spot any incorrect items. All the sorted waste ends up in storage skips, where it is compressed into bales, ready to be loaded onto trucks and sent to be recycled.
I'll be back.
Paper, cardboard and glass can be recycled into new paper, cardboard and glass products. Plastics go on to form new packaging, bottles, clothes, pipes and outdoor furniture. While metals may be anything from new food cans to parts for cars and aeroplanes. The more we recycle, the more money and resources we save.
So yeah, that's the material recovery facility at Water Beach. I don't know whether any of you, I know actually one of you caught the BBC show that was on last week that looked at waste, and they covered a section of the site at Water Beach, because obviously it was covering Peterborough, but that's where Peterborough's recycling goes as well. So before we go on, has anybody got any questions before we move on to the next sort of section?
Not from me. No.
No, not at all.
There's a hand raised, so is that Becca or Andy?
It's Rebecca.
Sorry, I've been writing down a few questions. I'm still eating my tea. Sorry.
do you want to save them to the end, or do you want to pop them in now?
I can wait to the end if that's okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
All right,
yeah.
I've been jotting them down through the thing.
Yeah, feel free.
Thank you.
I'll unraise your hand then.
So my specific role deals mainly with communicating with residents through social media, but also letters and various other forms as well. So with the one that obviously we'll look at first is social media. So the figures have changed on this slightly since this slide was put together. So we've got about 3,500 followers on Facebook now. Twitter, I think, is around about the same, and Instagram's gone up, I think, to about 700. So there's some of them are slowly growing, some of them are growing much quicker than others. But Facebook is definitely our biggest platform. It's our most interactive. And I think it's just because obviously the way the platform works, it allows us to sort of share into different groups to kind of get that new audience, really. On an average month, we reach just under 50,000. So that's gone over on some months, depending on what we're pushing. But it's a really good tool to be able to connect with people. And I'm guessing you've all sort of seen our profiles. So it's having found out about the talk that we're doing. We also have a quarterly full page in the Hunts Post. We distribute some information out to the parish and town magazines, and we also have been doing articles that we put out into local publications, and we do that on a bi-monthly basis at the moment, and that's just highlighting particular topics that we're trying to sort of get out sort of knowledge wider, really. Frozen. We also run various campaigns, and that's the other part of my role, is to look at different projects that we do. So these were the ones that were sort of handed to me when I started in this role a couple of years ago, and they were things that kind of get put in on the back burner until somebody was in post to kind of really run with them. So we looked specifically at food waste and at textile waste, because they're the two biggest contaminants of our recycling bin. Both at the curbside and then also at the material recovery facility as well. And they also, in terms of the environmental impact, they're the two biggest issues that we have as well, not just by the volume, but in terms of the damage that they can do. But I can come on to that a little bit later on as well. And then the third leaflet on there is the communal bins. So when people live in flats and things, they have shared bins. And they're much harder to reach in some respects, because they don't have sort of individual ownership over their waste facilities. So we kind of did a big project on looking at communal areas. We've also just over a year ago now started our Hunts Waste Busters group, which is sort of our ambassador scheme. So it's local residents that come along. We meet on a monthly basis, and we kind of share information backwards and forwards about what we're working on and we'd like their help with, but also what they see as a focus and different projects that they want to lead on. So some of the good things that we've kind of done with them is a TerraCycle project. So looking at what TerraCycle collection points are available across Huntingdonshire, and having that as a shared document now, so people can access what's around close to them. Not all of them are in Huntingdonshire, so there's some that are sort of on the outskirts because they don't have a collection point within. And it's also spread wider than TerraCycle to just be different places where you can recycle things. So supermarkets with soft plastics, we're beginning to kind of get the list of those supermarkets that do offer that service as well to add on to there. We've also done some surveys and looked at competitions. So we're doing the League of Waste Minimisers, which we've piloted, started in November or December, where we've worked with a local scout group. So we've got them to do waste audits and try and reduce their waste over a specific period of time. And then hopefully with the results of that, we'll then be able to roll that out wider and kind of really get different groups of all ages kind of taking part in those kinds of challenges. As I mentioned, the articles, some of those are written by our waste busters, and they sort of help and input into our social media as well. So some posts have been written specifically by them, but they also support on what content for us to write as well. And then we've also looked at zero waste shops across the district and sort of highlighting those. When I started this role, there wasn't a single one within Hunts. So we kind of shared the ones that were all around the edges. And since being in post, there are now, I believe, 7 within Huntingdonshire that have just opened in the last 2.5 years, which is really great to see. Yeah, so it's kind of sort of continually promoting those, so more people become aware of them. Also looking at repair cafes and promoting those where we know they exist, clothes swaps and drop-off points and anything else that's kind of comes under the sort of more zero waste initiatives, if you like. So that's the kind of presentation as a run. Some of the other projects that we've worked on, so we started in June last year a nappy discount initiative. So we've teamed up with reusable nappy providers to offer discounts on selected products, and that's been running, as I say, since June last year. I think we've had about 60 applicants for that, and we've predicted that that's saved somewhere between 60 and 100 tonnes of waste across the next year or so. Obviously, as they get used, the tonnage saved will go up. And then another project we launched in September last year was a food waste trial. So we've given 1,000 caddies out to a selected area within St Neots, and half of those also got paper liners to see if we can increase the amount of food waste that was being capturing. And we've actually found, so we've done an interim report over the last sort of 6 weeks or so, and actually found that rather than increasing our garden waste collection, we've reduced our refuse collections, but the garden hasn't gone up. And we also did a survey, and the results of that would indicate that it's due to people sort of taking the food waste out and putting it into the green bin, but seeing the volume that they were creating, and then they've minimised that waste as well. So not only have they taken it out of the grey bin, they've then reduced the amount of waste they were creating. We also had quite a bit of feedback from them to say that they, in doing that process, it's also made them more aware of their waste in general. So they've started to look at sort of their packaging that comes on their food products, and just generally their waste as a whole, and then looking to reduce that. So it's a big win-win, but we've got another 2 months before the trial ends to see sort of where it goes. We've sort of started to look at what we could do with that. So yeah, that's kind of my spill, and it's just sort of like what you guys would like to know following that, really. So Rebecca, if you've got questions, should we start with you and see where it goes?
Okay, I've got a few questions. So some of it is from a kind of personal perspective, as someone that lives in Huntingdonshire, and some of it is because I also work for the Wildlife Trust. So I've kind of got 2 hats on when I'm asking these questions. So the first one was just to clarify, you mentioned about contamination of the recycling. Is it people not washing food off containers? Is that the issue?
It sometimes is. It's not the whole reason. So when the material recovery facility send back that report, which gives all the sort of percentages, the food waste covers any food waste, and it includes, so for example, if somebody had not washed up a ketchup bottle, it would be the whole weight. So it would be the ketchup bottle and the ketchup inside that would contribute to the weight that's been rejected. And sometimes it is just that it's a dirty container, but sometimes it is complete pieces of food. So I usually use a couple of examples. So when I go out with the cruise and we're rejecting bins, I've come across an entire broccoli still wrapped in its plastic being chucked on the top of a bin. And another example was a whole pizza in a pizza box. So it definitely is food as well, but it varies. And when we obviously ask residents to make sure that they are washing out their containers or wiping things that have got food on them before they put it in. And people usually say, well, how clean does it need to be? And it doesn't need to be sparkling. It just needs to be sort of free of food, essentially. So, you know, if it's got a little tiny bit of a smudge of spread on the side of your spread tub, that's not going to have a big impact. If it's got a big lump in the bottom, it will. So it's making sure that it's just rinsed out or wiped out. And the other part that people usually question with that is the amount of water that's wasted. And it's like we don't ask you to wash up specifically with these things. Just do it with the rest of your washing up. Put it in the dishwasher or at the end of your washing up. And even if you were to use fresh water to clean it, you'd use less water than it would take to kind of get that material from raw, in terms of mining for raw materials and processing them to the point where they're at the same sort of level. So it is worth doing, essentially. Yeah.
And what is the impact when you come across a bin that's got that in it? Is the whole thing rejected, or is there a way of sorting out the problem?
So if the crews catch it at the curbside, they reject the bin, and they'll put a tag on the bin to say what's the contaminating item within it. And then there's a process that follows that. So if they do that again within a certain amount of time, they'll get a letter, and eventually they may lose their bin. We remove approximately 3 bins a month due to this process. It is going down slightly, but it still does happen. And we've also started writing to people with if they've got food or textiles in their bins on their first episode, just to kind of give them that additional information and send one of those leaflets out with that as well. Sorry, I've lost the second part of your question.
What happens
if
you miss it and it's at the recovery
material
centre?
Yeah. So if it gets to that point, so the whole batch will go into the back of the truck. It all gets compressed together as they're going on their round. It will then get taken to a transfer station where it all gets tipped out. And then Amy come from Waterbeach with a big truck that can take a lot more in their truck, and scoop it up, take away a big batch of it, and that then gets put into the material recovery facility. What then gets removed is anything that is contaminated at that point. So, for example, if it is, if it's a bit of polystyrene, for example, that would just get removed. Just the polystyrene will come out. If it's textiles, it could be embedded with things like glass and food that's got in there as well. So anything that's kind of attached itself to the textiles will go. And then if it's food, it depends on what the item is. So the example I tend to use is a ketchup bottle. So if it's a glass ketchup bottle and it gets broken on its root, it's still got half a bottle of ketchup in it. That then gets everywhere. So anything that's then contaminated by that ketchup will then also be landfilled as well. So it's kind of depends on sort of response, unfortunately. But some people worry that whole truck is going to get sort of rejected, but we wouldn't know that anyway until it gets to Waterbeach, and by which time it's been mixed with so much other stuff.
Okay. Can people tour the material recovery centre?
Yes, but not at the moment.
Okay.
So they were doing visits. They haven't started them again, and they're run. I believe it's still Amy you contact. You go through to Amy and ask to go on a visit. I can send a link out afterwards, actually, because we've got so the person that delivers that tour now works for the county council. So I can send you his direct details to kind of be on a waiting list, if you like, for when they restart. They are still running their talks as well, though. So if you did want to kind of find out a bit more specifically what happens at the material recovery facility, you could do one of their talks to find out more on that now, or you could wait. It's up to you. It's a really interesting tour. It's a bit smelly, as you can imagine, but it is quite fascinating just to see that the scale of the plant. It's yeah, it's really interesting.
I've got more questions, but I don't want to get in the way of other people, so I can
take a break.
You can answer, yes, I can come back to me.
Yeah, any other questions?
No, carry on with your questions. I'm fine for the moment. I don't know about Kate's, but I'm fine.
Yeah, no, carry on, please.
What happens if the glass is broken? Because you talked about there being actual people at the recovery centre sort of picking bits out and stuff. Yeah. What happens if there's broken glass in there? So
there usually is, because of the where it gets compacted on its route. So there usually will be. When it goes through sort of those conveyor belts and things like that, there's basically it's like a grid, and the glass falls through as it goes across. And then bits are taken out at later stage if they're still whole or too big to go through that. And then at the end of that process, I believe, from what I've the sort of knowledge that I've gained through doing this, is that there's different size grids essentially, so you get different sizes of glass fragments, and they're all then shipped off.
Okay.
I've noticed recently that my like a quiche box, for example, that has a window in it, it always says, or not always, but recently when I check, it says it's the whole thing is recyclable. Now, in the past, I've always ripped that bit off and put them in separately, but it seems to intimate that you can put those in together now. Is that okay?
It depends on the type of plastic. So if it says it is, it should be, is my hope. And it depends on the manufacturer in terms of what label they decide to put onto the product. If you did leave it in, it wouldn't be a massive issue, because it would get removed from so basically it'll go through to the paper mill, and then in the paper mill process, the plastics then get pulled out. So it's the same thing for like windowed envelopes and things like that. They'll get taken out in that process. However, it might be that it's a slightly sturdier plastic, and it comes under the form of a rigid plastic, which is sort of the same plastic as like a pot or tub kind of plastic, because some of them are getting a bit more rigid, aren't they, in that sense. So it depends on what form that plastic then forms into. So plastics are a really hard one, because they can look the same and be completely different, and it makes it very hard, and I don't envy the person's job who it is to kind of figure out which one it is. And I know a lot of it is now done by machinery, because it can be more specific. The machines can sort of detect it a bit more than what the eye can. But yeah, so with plastic films, so the sort of bread bags and packaging and salad bags and all those sorts of plastics, there's two kind of distinctive types, and one is a stretchy bag, which is the ones that can go in the curbside bins, and they're made basically of one type of polymer, one type of plastic, whereas the ones that are crinkly and would tear are made in multiple different types of plastic layered on top of each other, and that's what makes them difficult to recycle. And then you go up to what's called a rigid plastic, like the bottles, tubs and trays, and then you go up to hard plastic, which is sort of like what you'd get for furniture or toys and that kind of plastic.
I suppose I've always thought of things that are multiple materials in one, that is it better to separate them? Because in the past I've separated them, or sometimes I haven't recycled it because I think, well, this is two different things and I can't get it apart. So should I still put it in the recycling, or should I be separate? Is it even if it says the container, like the quiche box, even if it says that is all recyclable, is it better to take it apart? Would that save? Because it's not a massive issue to me. It's just, it's slightly easier to chuck it in without taking it apart. But if that causes effort at the other end.
No, I think in terms of that example, I'd say do take it apart if it is, like you say, no extra hassle, because then hopefully it is a rigid plastic, which is why they're saying the whole thing is recyclable, and then that can be pushed through on the plastic side, rather than it being sent to the paper mill for them to kind of class it as a reject, even though it'll then be captured and will be recycled, because they kind of separate the rejects out and then pass it on to the places that they can. So it would mean that Amy would be able to pass it on as a rigid rather than it going to the paper mill to then be passed on as a rigid. And then with things that are literally intertwined, so for example, like a crisp packet, so it's got foil and plastic, and it's completely impossible for a person to kind of be able to separate out. The only one of those that we are able to take are the cartons, and that's because there's so many cartons. There's quite a big infrastructure already to deal with them, and they're dealt with in a separate way from things like crisp packets. So it basically goes into like a big washing machine that then separates out all those different particles. So there's foil, there's card, and there's plastic. And that.
Do you mean Tetra Pak in that?
Yeah, the Tetra Pak cartons. Yeah. So they
like
can be separated.
Sorry, is that like Pringles tubes, things like that? Is that what can you put those in the recycling or not?
No, so it's literally just drinks cartons.
Yeah, I didn't think you put Pringles. Yeah, so I was led to believe you couldn't put Pringles tubes in there. So
no,
which is a bit annoying.
Yeah.
So my I generate quite a lot of Tetra Pak because I now don't drink normal cow's milk. So I have like milk in a carton, but it's always got a sludge of whatever the sludgy bit is in the bottom of these milks. Calcium carbonate, I think. And I have to confess to not washing those out as well as I should do. How much of an issue is that if it's going to be kind of bulked up and whatever?
Yeah, I think in terms of like they accept a certain amount, same as sort of like tomato paste tubes, for example. They know that it's really hard to kind of get the inside clean, so they'll accept the kind of food contamination as long as it can be contained. So obviously make sure it's kind of flat packed, it's not going to pop open when it gets compacted, and put the lid back on and it should be fine. I'm the same. I also don't drink cow's milk either, and I have the cartons, and what I do is I cut them open sort of halfway down, not fully, but just enough to kind of get water in, rinse it out and empty it, and that I find does get it out a lot better than just having it come out the spout, because the spout isn't in like a corner, it's in like the middle of the thing, so it's really hard to get the last dregs out.
But I find if I shake mine every time I use it, it doesn't have so much left in the bottom.
Yeah,
a little bit of water and you get hardly anything out of it. You've got to shake it every time before you pour it.
That's interesting to know about the tomato paste things, because I don't recycle those because I think they're too contaminated, but I will now.
Yeah, as long as you get out as much as you can, it'll be absolutely fine going through. Yeah,
that's good. So Andy and I are in the process of setting up a repair cafe, but it's in Peterborough, so it's not quite your thing, your area. But would you be able to put us in touch with whoever we might need to connect with in Peterborough?
So there isn't an alternative to our team in Peterborough. There's a waste team, and I'm sure they'll be happy to kind of help promote you where they can, but they don't have the same kind of structure, if you like, as what we do in Hunts, and they don't have so they haven't got their own social media platforms, pages and things. They don't have their own for that. They just go through the central one, or through Aragon, which is the people that the company that manages the waste in terms of collections. But in terms of like, we're happy to still promote, because obviously there's people that live very close to the border with Peterborough, and they might prefer to come into Peterborough to kind of use that space. So we can, once you've got it up and running, let us know the details and we can get you added onto our page on the website so people know to go there. We've also got the ones that are scattered around Cambridge. I think there's 3 different sites or 4 different sites in Cambridge, so we promote those, and the one in Yaxley as well.
Okay, yeah, I was just about to say there's one in Yaxley. So we do already have a Facebook page, although it's not very active at the minute. But if you wanted to connect with us, you could connect already. But just watch out, because there is a Peterborough repair cafe in Canada as well as our
Okay.
one. So when you join it, make sure it's the right
Yeah.
one, or when you connect with it, make sure it's the right one.
Yeah, will do.
Brilliant. That would be great. Thank you. So we don't have, you know, we are in the very early stages, but we had thought that alongside the repair cafe that you know, we might have other things going on. So we went to visit a couple of years ago when we were first thinking of starting pre-COVID. We went to visit the one in Cambridge, or one of the ones in Cambridge, and they had all kinds of extra stuff going on around it, you know, like a clothes swap and a litter pick and a skip and loads of other stuff. So we might have things like workshops on upcycling and other bits going on around the outside. So yeah, it would be good to connect if we can with the people in Peterborough in case there's something that they would like to do, or if there's something that you would like to do at it, then that would be good. And then I have my own at work. I have my own Facebook page, and I could kind of connect with you and promote some of the things, you know, I might say on my Facebook tonight I went to this talk on what would be your 3 top messages, things that you say again and again, or things that people often get wrong, that, you know, if you wanted 3 messages to get out there, what would they be?
It's a hard question because there's so many. I think the biggest one at the moment, which I touched on briefly earlier in terms of when we were looking at the campaigns, is food waste. So food waste, when people want to dispose of their food waste, most people, I hope, are putting it in their green bin. I know they're not because I've seen the tonnages, but it's when it goes into your grey bin and goes to landfill, it creates a lot of methane, which is really damaging to the environment. If they put it in their green bin, it would turn into compost. It would only release the carbon that's embedded within it as it grows, and it would actually put carbon back into the soil. And so rather than causing damage to the environment, it's actually helping the environment. And so that to me is a big thing at the moment that I'm trying to push. And so the importance of then using your green bin. And if you haven't got a green bin, contact us. We want everybody to have a green bin. We know that they don't. So communals at the moment, most of the communals don't have access to a green bin. But we don't want to just go and put them there. We're trying to implement them as and when people want them, but also on a slow basis on top of that to make sure that they're done right. So if somebody wants one and we've not got to them yet, yeah, to get in touch. So that's probably my biggest one. It's tough. I think textiles is probably another one because the embedded carbon that's in textiles. I saw a really worrying stat on this before, which was I can't remember the figures, but it was something like the amount of food waste that's comparable in terms of the embedded carbon in something. It's textiles is like 20-30 times more than the same tonnage of food waste. And so it's, although our tonnages of what's going into the grey bin and going to landfill is so much lower than food, the impact it's having is really damaging. It's just as bad, really. And it hasn't got to go into landfill. It can be recycled. Even, you know, your underwear and your socks that you definitely don't want to pass on to a charity shop for reuse, they can be recycled in textile banks, and some charity shops will take them as well. You know, it's really important to kind of make sure that those fabrics don't end up in landfill, that you do kind of get that full use out of them. And then a third.
I'll just chip in on textiles while you're thinking.
Yeah.
So there's the textile banks which will take clothes, not necessarily good clothes, but anything that can be turned into rags. The firefighters charity, some of the fire stations have got textile banks outside them where money goes to the firefighters charity, and they will take linen items, which I don't think the other textile banks will take. Of course, there's now Dunelm will take old duvets, amongst other things.
Oh, do they?
And
That's good.
pillows.
You've got one upstairs I need to get rid of.
Okay, thought of anything? Your third one now?
No, I was too busy listening to you, Chris.
Oh, sorry.
And yeah, the ASCO bins for the clothing, they take rags. They don't all state that they do, but we've confirmed with ASCO. So they're the ones that we promote, that we've teamed up with, and they'll have our Huntingdonshire District Council logo on them.
What's that, sorry?
ASTCO, ASTCO. I'll send you a link so you can kind of see where, like, you can share the link.
What is that?
Yeah.
What are they? Shop?
No, they're they work in selling textiles. So they're a company specifically set up for selling on and sort of making sure things are recycled, etc. So we've got like a contract with them, so they provide the bins and do all the management of it, but it's got our logos and they're on our land, so they're usually in our car parks. Right. But yeah, they're some of their bins say that they don't take rags. It's just where they're really old bins and they haven't been updated yet, which we've asked them to do, but they've not done yet. So yeah, that's another one. So that's but I'll send you the link. And I was in Yaxley today actually, and looking at textile bags. I've got some really weird pictures on my phone of all kinds of things. But yeah, to try and find out which ones will take rags. So I've kind of taken a picture of this long row of textile banks, and none of them state they take rags. But I've got it on my mission now to find out which companies do, so that I can then promote. You can put it in this one.
It'd be really good to have a map. Yeah.
So we've started adding bits like that to the TerraCycle spreadsheet that we've got. And yeah, so it's just I think I need to start splitting it out into different types of places to drop things, because it's just getting too big. But some of the textile banks are on there for that reason. So if you find any that are, let me know, and I can make sure they get added on. I think I did come up with something and then I carried on talking and I've forgotten, but I think it was along the lines of ask, you know, if there's ever anything that anybody is in doubt of, just ask. We're here to help. As you know, we're paid for by you to serve you. And so if you're stuck on something and we can help you do it better, ask. Either that or if you want to reduce your waste, do a waste audit. Look at what is actually going into each of your bins, because until you see it, you're not going to know it's there. That's the other potential. But yeah, I could be here all day giving you tips of, can we do this? Can we do that? But yeah, I think either one of those. Yeah.
So the supermarket's now doing soft plastic collections is quite good, I think, although my local one doesn't seem to want to get into it in a big deal. I have to take them a bit further away. But you know, they'll take crisp packets, biscuit packets, all manner of things. So that's another good thing that's been happening in the last year, maybe even.
Yeah, they started doing trials on them, I think about 18 months ago, but most of the trials either happened up north or sort of Cornwall kind of way. And then a company have pulled together like I think it was a company and a couple of different kind of charities have pulled together a mapping tool that then places on a map. You can put it in and see where you are, and you can see all the soft plastic recycling that's coming from the various supermarkets. And around the whole of east of England is just empty, which is really sad, because we all know that there are some, but we don't know necessarily where they are, and that map needs updating. As soon as the map is updated, I'll then be able to share it. But yeah, so we've got some of the ones. So if somebody knows of one that's near them, let me know, and that can also be added onto the TerraCycle spreadsheet. And Andy, you mentioned Pringles tubs. So that's a TerraCycle item. So there is actually, I don't know whereabouts in Hunt you're based, but there's one in Yaxley that does a collection for Pringles, because it's my closest one is either Yaxley or Andle, so I live in Peterborough, and it's either Yaxley or Andle Road for me, so they're both about the same distance, but yeah, there's not many of the Pringles ones, but there is one there.
Right, that's good.
But that's
I've got a
useful
big
because
stack
I live in Stilton, so Yaxley's not very far,
Yeah.
and we're often in Andle Road, so either one of those. Yeah.
And it's if you go on their website and just you look at the item you're looking for, and then you click on a map, and it pins them all onto a map for you. So it's quite an easy thing to use. But yeah, I've got a big stack of Pringles tubs in my garden shed waiting to go from Christmas.
Am I correct in saying that pizza boxes as such, not with pizza in, like you said earlier on, but pizza boxes with no pizza in, they can't be recycled because they're too heavily contaminated? They often have a lot of grease on the box, don't they? I'll put it in the green waste bin. Is that the right place to put it or not?
Yeah. So the green bins can take a certain amount of cardboard. Obviously not a bin full of cardboard, but if it's mixed with other stuff, it's absolutely fine. What we usually suggest is taking the top off, because the top's usually clean, and putting the top in the recycling and the bottom in the green bin. Yeah.
Right. Okay. That's fine. That's what I thought, because it was usually quite heavily contaminated with grease, aren't they?
Yeah.
I'm sure pizza's not all that good for you, really. Take
any more questions from anyone?
That's the end of my question. Sorry to completely dominate the the discussion.
I have to say, plastics are a bit of a nightmare, because I'm involved in the industry for marking. Where I do coding and marking of products. So we make machines that print best before dates and stuff. And I know the various sorts of plastics that are available, because we have to mark on quite a lot of them and code on a lot of them. So I'm aware of source, and I know it's an absolute minefield. So if I was to sit here and say, which sorts of plastics can you recycle, because they all have a logo and a little triangle of numbers, and it also looks like which ones can you do. It's always difficult to know which ones can and which ones can't be done.
Yeah, the number and the triangle refers to the plastic it's made from, not necessarily how you can recycle it.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, which is really annoying, because most people presume that you can then judge by the triangle what you can do with it, but it's to do with the resin that made it, not how you can dispose of it, which is
I was always told it was 1, 2, 3 is the ones that you can, and the rest you can't.
Yeah, it's not as simple as that, unfortunately.
It's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. It's almost impossible to know what you can and can't recycle sometimes. And I'm sure in the past I've put stuff in my recycle bin that probably shouldn't have gone in there. I've gone, well, I think this can probably be recycled. It's hard plastic. I'm not really sure of the number of it, because it is quite a weird plastic, and I know the kind of material it is, but I'm thinking, well, I'll put it in. Maybe I shouldn't. Sometimes it's a bit of a, I'm standing over the bin going that way. I don't know, really. Just that way.
It's called wish cycling.
Yeah.
There's a name for it, yeah.
Is there a move, do you think, to make manufacturers or supermarkets responsible for producing packaging that can't be recycled?
Well, stopping producing packaging.
Make them responsible, so that there's a charge that, either that's passed on to the consumer, in which case they'll choose things that are cheaper, that are more likely to be recycled, or that the supermarket or the manufacturer in some way is responsible and has to, that encourages them then to only sell or produce things that are better, easier to be recycled.
Yeah, so there's last year, I'll say last year, probably a couple of years ago that it actually started, but there's consultations going on at central government level that are looking to tackle this, and there'll be a set of different things that are coming over the next few years to kind of implement those. So one of them, which is due to take place from April this year, is a plastic tax. So any packaging that goes onto the market that doesn't have at least 30% recycled content will have a £200 a tonne charge put on it. And over time, the plan is that the percentage will go up. So things will need to be more recycled in their initial phase. And the price per tonne will go up as well. So it'll become more and more expensive for anything that's under that. So that's one part of it. And then the other parts, so there was 3 consultations that were kind of run alongside each other. and they're kind of coming out in different phases, and the final papers aren't written on any of them yet, unfortunately. So one was extended producer responsibility, which means basically that they have to pay for any packaging that they put on the market. So that's in addition to the packaging, the plastic tax. Then there's deposit return scheme, which is what it says on the tin, which is due now to come into the extended producer responsibility is due to come into effect at the beginning of next year. The deposit return scheme is due to come into effect, I think, at the moment in December 24. And then the third one is to do a consistency of collections, so that making sure that everywhere across the country is able to recycle the same core materials, so that if you go across the border into a different district, you will be able to recycle the same stuff in the same way, just making it simpler. So when people move and the rules all change at the moment, it gets really complicated. Is to make that simpler, and that is due to, depending on how the consultation goes, but anything from sort of, I think it's 2025 to 2028, depending on what contracts what contracts local authorities have in place at the moment, and making sure that obviously there's not a big penalisation for coming out of contracts early. And that also, the last one of those, the consistency, should hopefully, it's looking likely that it would also bring in weekly food waste collections as separate, like just purely food waste collections across the country as well. That looks likely, but it's not confirmed yet.
So separate to garden waste, you mean?
Yeah. So for Hunts, you'll have a fourth bin. Yeah. So it's still up in the air at the moment about whether or not local authorities will be made to collect garden waste. So some authorities don't currently collect it. So some people will go to 3 bins and Hunts would go to 4, for example. Yeah. Chris, if you come on camera for a question. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, he's on mute. He's still on mute.
Oh.
Somebody's telling me something. You're on mute, Chris.
You're on mute.
Can't hear a word you're saying.
You were unable to undo it. He sometimes has technical.
Sorry, no, I'm here. I was saying I'd show my face for the last 5 minutes because there was a 5-minute warning came up recently.
Oh, okay. So yeah, has anybody got any more questions? Okay, I'm gonna stop. Oh yeah.
I just had a couple. It's been super interesting and really helpful. Thank you.
Good.
A couple of highly specific questions which have just sort of stumped me in recent times is, for example, jam jars. Should we separate the lid and the metal from the glass, or should we screw the lid back on? I keep hearing conflicting advice on that.
Overall, it doesn't really matter as long as they both go into the recycling bin. But we advise that they're put together, and it's just purely because it means that if we do that as a blanket message to put tops back on, they're more likely to be captured at the other end in the proper stream. I don't understand exactly how or why, because if you put a metal lid onto a glass bottle, for example, they'll end up at the glass place. But that's what we've been told, is that if they're put on top, they're more likely to be captured correctly.
Cool. Okay.
Rather than getting missed.
And the other thing which I would have been wondering about is the metal in tea lights. You know, you burn a tea light and you end up with a sort of metal container. Is it possible to recycle those?
Yes, please.
Magic. Great.
They have they usually have a little thing at the bottom to hold the wick in place.
Yes.
If that just gets removed, and then the aluminium casing can be recycled with the aluminium. Absolutely.
Okay, brilliant. Excellent. And just a couple of observations more than anything else. I think something which I suppose maybe a couple of years ago or so became aware of, but before that had no idea. So in the preceding years, I have a kitchen composting container to put food waste into. And for years I was lining that with one of the biodegradable kind of plasticky type liners. And it was only, as I say, a couple of years ago, I learnt that you shouldn't use those and you should use the paper bags instead. And I think that's quite a common area of confusion or misconception by people.
Yeah, and it might actually take precedence for my third thing, my third top tip to share potentially.
Okay, I'll use that then.
Yeah, and it's really frustrating, and we're constantly, like, we work with Amy obviously quite closely, but trying to work out if there's a way that we can take them, because it would greatly increase the uptake of people putting food in.
So I think a lot of people use them rather than paper liners.
Yeah, the paper liners are more expensive, and that's part of what the trials looked at. So they're less efficient, because obviously as they get too wet, they then tear quite easily. So we did the trial on the basis of seeing if there was a difference between providing just the caddy or providing the caddy and the liners. And there wasn't, I don't think it's a big enough or a long enough trial to really kind of get to the crux of that. The people that have used them have said, we want to continue to use them, but they should be provided more of them and for free. It's kind of the general feedback that we've got from them. Some people have said they're completely useless, and I'm not going to compost my food anymore, because if I can't put it in a compostable bag that's more sealed and etc., then I'm not going to do it. And so we've had literally the two extremes of, yes, it's brilliant and I'm going to do it forever now, and no, never again. But the liners, it comes up time and time again that they should be accepted on the feedback, and so we do keep talking to Amy and seeing what they can do. At the moment, they're running trials with Greater Cambridgeshire Shared Partnership, which covers Cambridge City and South Cambs. And I think they've gone out to, because they started the trial and then they've kind of upped it, and I think they're on 9,000 properties at the moment, where they're collecting segregated food waste with compostable liners that they're providing, so they can guarantee what kind of liner it is, because obviously, as we're talking about, there's a wide variety. When you say compostable liner, there's 50 million different types. So they're providing it so they can really test to see what they can use, and then that's then getting collected, and it's being treated separately from everything else. So it's collected, it can't go in the green bin, but you can put it in your food waste bin that goes and does the same process. But basically, with the garden waste that goes to Amy, the garden and food waste that goes to Amy, it gets processed in a way called in-vessel composting, which is these big kind of chambers almost, and one of them is specifically, or maybe two of them are specifically for this just segregated food waste, and they're basically looking to see how long it takes and if they can use that at scale across the entire district. At the moment, with the garden waste the garden and food waste that they're collecting as a whole, the process for getting that into the compost end product is about 8 weeks. And the compostable liners take 12 weeks. That's kind of the industrial standard, is it takes 12 weeks. So at the end of the 8 weeks, when everything else is ready, it looks like there's little bits of plastic in it. And so they can't then use that or sell that on, and then that has to go to landfill because it doesn't pass the non-contaminated criteria. So it's a really complex kind of thing, and trying to educate people in terms, like, and spread that knowledge of why we can't take them, and they just think we're just being difficult. But it's not. It's a big process, and so Amy are looking at it, and we're like, can we hurry up? Can we hurry up? Can we hurry up? But it's, at the moment, it's still a no for them, which is why we've done the trial to see if we can do that instead.
Oh, that's really interesting, and I think
very long-winded answer
there. No, it is. I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of education. It's about explaining to people why things have to be a certain way.
Yeah.
Because you're right, a lot of it is misconceived as just being picky or fussy or whatever it might be, and there are really valid reasons for some of these things. And that because I was you covered my other couple of questions that I had earlier on in your slides, in that You know, we have a monthly village magazine, and we have a quarterly parish magazine that comes around, and I feel that could be utilised. You know, there could be a kind of top tip every month in the village magazine or something like that, and that could reach loads of people.
If you wouldn't mind dropping me a note of what it is, just respond to the email that you've kind of we've got, and just let me know, and then I can make contact and see if we can get our articles put into there.
Yeah, no, that would be great, because I know that certainly where I live, that most people don't get the Hunts Post, so they wouldn't see any of that.
Yeah.
And free newspapers are a kind of thing of the past around here, and so actually getting the message out to residents is really hard for you, really hard. And I think that's the biggest part of all of this. You're right, it's about informing and educating.
And we find that we're often preaching to the converted, because obviously people that are interested are already doing the things correctly, and people that aren't interested aren't going to follow our pages, aren't going to look on our website, aren't going to pick up a magazine that specifically, you know, we put information into. But yeah, I mean, the number at the beginning was 77,000 properties. It's actually closer to 80,000 now, because obviously there's sort of more properties being built all the time, and trying to get into, you know, just through the door of any of those, you know, it's really difficult. We're planning this year. We tried last year and missed the deadline for it, but trying to go out with the council tax, of having a leaflet in there that kind of details our top tips. But even that, if people aren't interested, they're just going to put that straight into their
landfill bin. Yeah, probably the landfill bin.
I try to be more optimistic.
I'm more cynical.
But yeah, and it is about trying to spread that awareness, really.
I think that's a good idea, Kate, about having top tips in the parish newsletters, because loads of people read parish newsletters, you know, perhaps those that maybe won't be on Facebook. I think that's really good. I can send you a link to our one, the Stilton one.
Yeah,
and you'll
please
have
do.
to, haven't you?
That's just slightly red dirt. It's rubbish. It's not even worth having.
Oh, okay.
Go straight to the recycling bin. My one does.
At least it goes in the recycling bin.
Best place for it when it comes to the letterbox, to be honest.
Any more questions? Nope. Right, I'm going to stop the recording.